Welcome to Shenanigans Ensue with
Mary SanGiovanni!
Hi folks, welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. I'm Mary SanGiovanni, and of course, we are shenaniganing in a cosmic sort of way, as we usually do.
Today's show is brought to you by J.D. Horn's trilogy, Witches of New Orleans. Wall Street Journal best-selling author J.D. Horn's Witches of New Orleans trilogy begins with King of Bones and Ashes. Publishers Weekly says Horn's rich characterizations and setting, sparkling magic, and creepy villains bolster the narrative, and his focus on women as major players is particularly refreshing. The terrifying conclusion will have readers looking forward to the next installment. And Booklist writes, palpable descriptions of magic both enchant and disturb. Horn expertly weaves disparate storylines into a breathless, enthralling ending. In this thrilling trilogy of supernatural suspense, a secret society of witches in present-day New Orleans grows desperate as their magic weakens. To regain power, they will betray family, forsake former allies, and slaughter anyone who gets in their way. As the forces of dark magic threaten to consume her, one young witch must negotiate intrigue, treachery, and bloodlust to assume her rightful destiny. That means confronting the dark secrets in her own twisted family legacy. The only hope is the Book of Unwinding. But unwrapping the mysteries of the legendary grimoire could prove more frightening than anyone imagined. J.D. Horn's Witches of New Orleans trilogy, The King of Bones and Ashes, The Book of the Unwinding, and The Final Days of Magic. Purchased through Powell's.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com, or better yet, requested at your local library. The Witches of New Orleans. It's magic without mercy.
This week, as I think if you've been listening to this show long enough, I think you know that I'm always a little hesitant to talk about my own work. I feel like it's vain somehow. But since this will be airing very close to Halloween, and I'll be in New Jersey, I'm recording this early, and it seemed like an easy enough topic to talk about. I could talk about my own work. So this week, we're going to be talking about my novella for EMMY. This novella was published in 2011 by Thunderstorm Books. And in my opinion, it's a cosmic horror story in theme and execution. Although I don't remember it being a conscious effort to do so on my part. I don't think that when I wrote this, I thought so much of cosmic horror as being my thing. It just seemed like a logical way to explain the presence of otherworldly entities invading our safe space. I do think, though, that it does meet several of the criteria of cosmic horror fiction that we've talked about on the show so far. Maybe you can read it and decide for yourself and let me know. Now, at its core, For EMMY is a tale of loss. It's loss of family, loss of security, of reputation, and a peace of mind. To me, Emmy's disappearance is something like those last few lines of T.S. Eliot's poem, The Hollow Men. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. That, to me, I think encapsulates the difference between death in a story and someone going missing. A death, especially that of a child, is a savage tragedy, a violent upheaval in the hearts and minds and lives of those around him or her. But a disappearance hurts in an entirely different way. It's a tragedy of whispers, an upheaval of stares and long silences, of words not spoken. It's a quiet horror, basically, and both the narrator in this novella and her father suffer that slow internal decay. Where a loved one, in this case a child, went when the child goes missing is something which is hidden. And we've talked about a lot of cosmic horror has the idea of a cult at its heart is a thing that is hidden, a secret. All right. It is desperately sought after answers which all too often leads to the discovery of knowledge which can't be unknown. And I think that is the case in this novella. As with so many cosmic horror stories, the endeavor to obtain the knowledge and the success in learning it can lead to deterioration, even corruption. I was reading something the other day that said that a lot of cosmic horror, the thrust is that the presence of the supernatural entities or the pursuit of knowledge leads to spiritual, physical, and mental corruption. Corruption of the mind, the soul, the very sense of self. But there's also corruption of the peace and security we need to maintain our sense of self. And I think that's the case here. The narrator's discovery of the disturbing truth about missing person statistics and how easy it is to just slip away from normal everyday existence is a kind of corruptive journey. It's one kind of corruptive journey, while her father's retreat into himself is another. Now, like many cosmic horror stories, there is in this novella, I think, a sense of futility in the face of an awful truth. In this case, when they find out what that place is where so many people go when they go missing. The weight of shouldering such helplessness in the face of a horror beyond the ability of even our best efforts to find those we love or keep them safe is overwhelming and unbearable. So, while I don't think that a lot of my stuff is nihilistic in any real significant way, there is an aspect of that in this novella. As I was reviewing it, I realized that there really is a sense of hopelessness. Like, no matter what you do, it doesn't really matter. Because in the end, these things get to you anyway. Now, we really get up to some cosmic shenanigans, I think, when we venture into where these people actually go. Now, there's a spoiler alert coming up. I know that longtime listeners probably understand that a lot of these episodes do contain spoilers, but just as a heads up, here it comes. When EMMY returns from the place where she went missing too, it's clear that her little mind has been exposed to knowledge of an outer world, another dimension with terrible gods and monsters, which is beyond her 5-year-old ability to express. Now, very little in the novella is given about what this world is like, or how she survived so long there, or what she encountered. How much she consciously remembers, even, is debatable. But clearly her time there made a significant impact, because there is a scene where we do get some indication of, at the very least, how she perceived where she was and what she encountered. We also get another glimpse into that other world toward the climax of the novella, where we see a little bit of the inhabitants of the place, and we get some cosmic horror tentacle goodness. We have a tentacle reaching through a rip between dimensions as it's looking to reclaim what it lost. And I think on our cosmic horror checklist, then, we have proof of an alternate universe or a multiverse, essentially space and time that is bigger than ours, and forces more powerful and terrible than our religion or science has imagined. And that's what's always fascinated me. I always thought, there's so many great stories about monsters or weird happenings, not so much ghosts, because I think even science has a vague idea of what we believe ghosts to be, but monsters, cars that eat people, killer houses, evil dolls, all that kind of, where that stuff comes from, where the supernatural entity or power behind that comes from, has always sort of fascinated me. And there are plenty of stories that never explain it. They never talk about that source. Some of them, vaguely theorized, like Mile 81, Stephen King's long short story, maybe it's a novella even, Mile 81, theorizes where the car that eats people comes from. He even tries to, from a Buick 8, sort of theorize where maybe this stuff comes from. But in a lot of cases, we just can't possibly know. We can't possibly know what makes these things happen. And while the fun part of writing for me is to delve into the origin, the source of the monster, as much as I would delve into the backstory of any main character or even any secondary character, sometimes the not knowing is more terrifying. I've mentioned in a lot of my novel-length works the mythos that is sort of growing up around all of the novels, that is sort of being constructed throughout all the novels, of a possible reason why these things keep happening, where they come from. And it's usually varied locations, but all sort of connected through one interdimensional medium. But without going too far off into the weeds, the point is that for EMMY, there is a little bit of that. There's a mild indication that if you've read the Triumvirate, that this is the same dimension that the initial sequence in the Triumvirate, the initial interdimensional creature, is from the same place. But other than that, we don't really know anything about it. It's another world with another laws of physics, another science. It can't necessarily survive very long here, and that's okay. It doesn't need to. It's not trying to come through here. It's not trying to be a presence. It's trying to be an absence. It's trying to create an absence. And I think that's important for what I'm coming to later. But what I think is underlying all of this horror, what I want to talk about first, is the idea that what we have in this novella is a couple of terrible realizations. That knowledge that maybe they were half pursuing, at least the narrator was pursuing, that if one person can go missing that way, then so can others. And that no one is really safe from that. And perhaps just as bad, if we can accidentally slip through the cracks to that place, it isn't beyond the realm of possibility, therefore, that something from there could get lost here. And that is a premise, I think, that underlies pretty much all of my books, all of my stories, that interdimensional travel is often accidental and often disastrous, but it happens. That the same way that, earthquakes open up holes in the earth, or tornadoes knock down buildings, or tsunamis wash away coastline, sometimes, cracks and rips and tears just happen between dimensions, and things happen. Unfortunately, if something did come here, or worse, if we did end up going there, it might very well wreak havoc that we are ill prepared to deal with. And I think that's the horror of it, is that it's one thing, too, that if it happens to us, that's horrible. If it happens to someone you love and there's nothing you can do about it, there's no way to protect that person, that's even worse. That's even scarier. And as I mentioned before, I think there's a bleakness, maybe because of that. There's a bleakness in this novella that I don't think is there in my other work. And at risk of getting too personal, it was written during a personally traumatic time in my life. And I think a lot of the hopelessness I was feeling at the time made its way into the story. And I think it's better that it did, because I think the bleakness of it is one of the things that solidifies it as a cosmic horror story. There's pain there at the indifference of forces who we wish would protect innocents like children. But maybe those forces don't exist, or they just don't care. There's despair that there are malignant opposing forces which we cannot prove, let alone guard against. So we are vulnerable to them. The people we love are vulnerable to them. And there's also a prevailing sentiment again, and we've discussed this in other episodes, there's a prevailing sentiment that there are fates worse than death, and that having gone missing is one of them. And I do believe that. Bear with me here. There's almost something paranormal in the concept of people going missing. That the missing are somehow held in an indefinite stasis, where whatever awfulness surrounds them can't be lessened or arrested even by death. And the reason for this, I think, is that there's a kind of psychological manipulation of time when someone is missing. Because there's no answer, there's no rigid set of facts. In essence, we're blinded and deaf to the fate of our loved one. And in our blindness and deafness, we are left with the worst kind of fear, and that's fear of the unknown. We are left to believe that horror continues indefinitely because we don't know about any definitive stop to it. You know, it's horrible to me, the idea that, you know, a loved one might be tortured and killed, and we can't get there to stop it. But at least in death, the pain stops, the fear stops. Our loved one's not there anymore. When the person's missing, it could go on indefinitely, and we just don't know. We just don't know. And there is something so much worse to me about that idea that even the most violent death, it's not as bad as being missing, because being missing has no beginning. It has no end, no dimensions, no length and width and height. It is bigger than us. It is indifferent to our pain and anxiety, and in a sense, it's immortal. There are no parameters, and there is nothing we can do about it. And that, to me, is, I think, the essence of cosmic horror. The idea that something can happen to us or someone we love that is beyond our control, and that even conceiving of trying to stop it is in essence useless, or at some point won't matter anyway. Now, what I humbly submit about this novella, that it may contribute to the body of cosmic horror literature, is the idea of nothing as something. Now, if you listen to last episode, we talked about the somethingness under the nothing. How in that particular story, in The People of the Pit, there was an almost innocuous nothingness, that what the main character feared was never quite defined, but it was clearly there because of the somethingness under the nothingness, the gut instinct, the feeling over the rational thought that was, you know, supported by physical senses. What in this novella we're doing is the idea that the nothing is a something, that it is something horrible, something in some ways more horrible than the something, like a something that is something, that the absence of a presence is as terrifying or more terrifying a counterpoint to the substantiality of presence. Okay? The monster in this story is as much the insidious not knowing, and I capitalized not knowing as almost an idea or a monstrous concept. I would say that not knowing is as much a monster as the tentacle thing that reaches from a rip in space and time to try to take back EMMY. The not knowing is what ultimately corrupts the characters, not the monster. It's not knowing about the future. It's not knowing about the present. And it's not knowing if you can really trust the past. It is what ultimately feeds on them until they are weak, and then replaces what was once happy and safe and secure in them, kind of the same way a cancer destroys and replaces healthy cells. That the rip and the entities beyond it are the architects of this not knowing is almost secondary, like the great old ones who are asleep in their cities. The not knowing is the madness they inflict on their victims, so that even knowledge is filtered through the distortion of perception it has caused. In my opinion, the not knowing is the true horror, and the devastation, the destruction that it wreaks on people, to me, is in some ways more horrible than the knowing. And although I think the narrator doesn't quite believe that, and in fact may even say that sometimes when you find out what you didn't know, it seems like it's almost worse. It's not. And I think if you really read the novella, you can see that she's wrong there. That the true issue, the damage is already done. By the time EMMY comes back, the damage is done to all of them. And I'd submit that makes it makes the novella for EMMY a candidate for the cosmic horror canon of literature there. So
today's show is brought to you by J.D. Horn's trilogy, Witches of New Orleans. Wall Street Journal best-selling author J.D. Horn's Witches of New Orleans trilogy begins with King of Bones and Ashes. Publishers Weekly says Horn's rich characterizations and setting, sparkling magic, and creepy villains bolster the narrative, and his focus on women as major players is particularly refreshing. The terrifying conclusion will have readers looking forward to the next installment. And Booklist writes, palpable descriptions of magic both enchant and disturb. Horn expertly weaves disparate storylines into a breathless, enthralling ending. In this thrilling trilogy of supernatural suspense, a secret society of witches in present-day New Orleans grows desperate as their magic weakens. To regain power, they will betray family, forsake former allies, and slaughter anyone who gets in their way. As the forces of dark magic threaten to consume her, one young witch must negotiate intrigue, treachery, and bloodlust to assume her rightful destiny. That means confronting the dark secrets in her own twisted family legacy. The only hope is the Book of Unwinding. But unwrapping the mysteries of the legendary grimoire could prove more frightening than anyone imagined. J.D. Horn's Witches of New Orleans trilogy, The King of Bones and Ashes, The Book of the Unwinding, and The Final Days of Magic. Purchased through Powells.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com, or better yet, request it at your local library. The Witches of New Orleans. It's magic without mercy.
Anyway, that's it for this week. I hope to see you next week. If you enjoy Cosmic Shenanigans, you might also enjoy another show I co-host, The Horror Show with Brian Keene. Both of them are available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and all other platforms via the Project Entertainment Network. And you can listen to them for free. As always, all of them are for free. Please consider, if you have some extra money that you're not doing anything with, it's supporting the Project Entertainment Network with donations to their Patreon, donations to the network in general, because your donations are what is keeping shows like Cosmic Shenanigans and The Horror Show with Brian Keene and many, many, many other really good podcasts going. So if you consider doing that, you can find all the information you need on the Project Entertainment Network. Also, thanks to engineer Dave Thomas. You can watch his channel most nights at twitch.tv/meteornotes. Also, consider subscribing to his Twitch channel through your Prime, Amazon Prime. It is free. It doesn't cost you anything. If you subscribe that way, Amazon will give Dave money. And Dave does like money. Money makes sure that Dave can eat, and money makes sure that Dave can continue to engineer for us and to play video games on his Twitch channel. So please consider subscribing through your Amazon Prime membership and support Dave. Okay? Thank you for listening. I will see you next week. Bye.
Do you love comic books and consider yourself a die-hard fan? Then you need to listen to Parlapod. We have news, reviews, and interviews with your favorite pros, all while bringing some serious laughs. New episodes drop every Wednesday in time for New Comic Book Day. Parlapod is available on the Project Entertainment Network, all major podcast outlets, and parlapod.com. Tune in and fuel your fandom with Parlapod.